Hello everybody, I'm back. Did you miss me? So, I have some good news. I got the Twitch Strat stuff working again. So, if you are watching via Twitch, then I will actually see what you have to say this time. And I think I even managed to get it so that I don't even have to use my phone to monitor the Facebook conversations. I'm not 100% certain. We will see. But I think I got it fixed so that both Facebook messages and Twitch messages will appear on my screen together, which would be great if that has actually worked. If it hasn't, doesn't matter. I still have my phone, so I can still see whatever people send me over Facebook, and it's just important that I can now see whatever anybody sends me over Twitch, because I can already see I have people on Twitch who are watching this, so that is great. Alright, so hello, people on both Facebook and Twitch. Alright, so, where were we? Personal care in schools is where we were up to. We're almost done. Have a look at that. We're at P. We're over the halfway point. Anyway, disability-related supports provided by state and territory governments to students to assist them with routine activities in school. This assistance generally covers meals, toileting, personal hygiene, dressing, mobility, along with complex supports, i.e. medicine and health supports. I really want to give my thumbs up to this. I really want to say all of the approval. I don't know what it really looks like in practice. Obviously, when I was a kid, NDIS didn't exist, and I remember my experiences as a kid in that sort of a setup, or I remember some of them anyway. And, I mean, when some of the abuses come from your teachers, that's a different thing. But, I feel like that's kind of outside the bounds of this for the moment, and at the end of the day, it being in here is a net positive. Like, even if there are bad examples, it's bad examples within a net benefit environment, as far as I'm aware. So, I think that is all good, but once again, not being a kid or having a kid in this circumstance, I am relatively limited in my ability to properly comment on that particular front. So, plan inflation. In the NDIS context, refers to the increase in plan values between participant plans, usually every 12 months. Okay, so now I'm going to give you some information that I myself only found out relatively recently. It was some of the... On the one hand, it was some of the happiest information I got out at the time about NDIS, but it also really made me go, why is this like that? So they say usually every 12 months. The minimum is every 3 months. You can have a review every 3 months. So if you chew through your entire budget, like I have been, within a 3-month time period, if it's under 3 months, you can't get reviewed. But if it takes you 3.5 months, 4 months, cool. Like, you've chewed through all your money. We're going to do another review. And at the moment, a review, unless they remove you from NDIS entirely for some reason, they cannot reduce your plan by more than 20%. Which, it's weird, because at the time I was really happy when I found out, because we were expecting to chew through my entire budget within 3 months. And we actually should have chewed through my entire budget within 3 months. The reasons we didn't are a thing. That is another conversation that I'm not quite going to get into right now. But I was genuinely worried, because I thought it was about 9 months that, like, between reviews was the minimum. Somebody had told me that it was 9 months. And so I actually was really worried that I'm going to run out of funds before Christmas, and I'm going to have to go through the first half of 2024 without any supports at all. And at the time, there were a lot of concerns, like, obviously, about my parents, my family, their ability to look after me to any extent, and just a lot of these sorts of issues. And so finding out, oh, it's 3 months, 3 months is the minimum, that was just such good news for me at that time. But the flip side of that is, you remember how in a previous stream I was talking about how abuses do happen. Providers abuse the system. Yeah, when somebody doesn't need, like when their budget could last for 12 months, but a provider deliberately overcharges or just has such high charges that it uses up the entire budget within 3 months, they get rewarded for doing so because the budget just gets replenished. And it's not quite no questions asked, it's because it will only go down by up to 20%. Providers can actually abuse their participants, secure in the knowledge that they're probably going to get the money all over again without issue. Especially within a 3-month process, because that's not really enough time for the participant to even necessarily find an alternative option. To go and find a new provider and to get the new support set up. So, yeah, it's one of those moments where I was like, I'm so happy for my specific circumstance, and that is what you want from NDIS. But I can also see how providers, like, it was a hole in what I knew, that providers were doing this sort of thing, and I wasn't understanding what the incentive there was, or how it was working, or why that was, like, why would they do, and like, oh, they can do that every 3 months? Of course they're doing it. If there's not a 12-month delay, of course they're doing that. So, yeah, that was something that really struck me about plan inflation and all that sort of thing. When they talk about the ballooning NDIS budget, that is definitely part of it. Anyway, planning process. The process of developing a plan, including evidence gathering, planning meetings, the discussion of a participant's goals without the participant, and aspirations, and the statement of participant supports. I will keep coming back to without the participant because, yeah, just reading that, this sounds good. This really sounds like they're putting the participant front and center. If the participant isn't involved in all stages of that process, then no, they're kind of not. Anyway, positive rights-based. The culture and approach providers should have in place when delivering behavior support and restrictive practices that is focused on improving the quality of life and protecting the rights of people with disability. Yep, I can't see any issues there. Preventative measures. Measures that proactively regulate providers and workers to reduce the risk of harm and promote quality. For example, provider registration and worker screening. Neither of which are actually inherently necessary to being on NDIS. You can make arguments for why that is a good thing or a bad thing, depending on what your disability is, what supports you need, and so on and so forth. But it's hard to proactively regulate something when it's not mandatory that people are even registered or screened. Yeah, and that is a problem that may actually be unavoidable. That may be a fact of the NDIS. I don't think it inherently has to be. But I think it's a problem. The reason I think it's a problem is because of how privatized it is. So when the privatized companies aren't being regulated, aren't being it's not being enforced, they're not receiving punitive measures, they can just, they can close one company down, and the same provider can technically have 3 other companies operating at the exact same time, and those companies suffer no penalties for the one company of theirs that got systemically penalized. They can just fold that one company and just expand their other companies. It's no loss. These sorts of private industry abuses are a problem, and a lot of the supposed preventative measures don't actually do anything to prevent that, or at least they don't do nearly enough to prevent that. but some of the things that they would have to do in order to prevent that can encroach on the disabled person's rights, wants, desires, or needs. And so there is this weird give and take that is only there because they privatized it. Well, it's not only there because they privatized it, but it's significant because it was privatized. Anyway, continuing forwards. Provider of last resort. A provider who is responsible for delivering an essential support or service when the market fails and there is no other timely way to deliver these supports or services. The provider can be a government or non-government organization. I haven't actually had to deal with these guys. I haven't actually had to deal with that ever. I've never actually encountered that. I've never encountered that in terms of discussion about abuses. I've never encountered that in terms of effective service. That is just not something that I have actually seen come up in all of my experience and the experiences of everyone I've talked to. That doesn't mean it's not there. It just might mean that I haven't been talking to the right people or to the groups that have this experience. So that is actually something I know absolutely nothing about within this context. And I feel like I probably should, to be perfectly honest. But it is something I don't know anything about. Psychosocial disability. Oh, we're going to have fun with this one. Arises from the interaction between a person with a long-term mental health condition that may be episodic and attitudinal and environmental barriers that hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. So the reason why we're going to have fun with this one is because one of Labour government's stated promises, it was one of their policies on their website, still is, going into the election, it was one of their stated goals, was to de-emphasize and to remove psychosocial disability from the NDIS. It has been a big point that they have been making. It has been a goal that they have been striving towards. And it is one of the concerns, when this review came out, I had 3 different people message me saying, yep, this is the first steps in, the first genuine steps in removing autism, ADHD, psychosocial disabilities, in removing these things from NDIS. I don't know if that's true. I haven't actually seen that in the review yet. That doesn't mean it isn't there. It just means I haven't seen that yet. But it is a very, very clear and vocal concern within the disabled community, and has been for over a year, since before the election. Before the election, there were people in the disabled community talking about how this was a goal of Labour. And they haven't backed down. They haven't changed it. They have continued forwards with that. So, yeah. You remember how I kept saying that they don't recognise my disability, but I got in because of autism? Yeah. Yeah, so they may take me off because of autism. And so if they don't recognise, if they continue not recognising my catatonia, I could lose NDIS because of this. Which, that'll be all sorts of fun and games, and will totally the last few years of time and money and stress and actively making my condition statistically worse and functionally worse. That'll all have been worth it. See the sarcasm dripping from my lips. Anyway, psychosocial supports. Supports for people with psychosocial disability to rebuild and maintain connections, manage daily activities, build social skills, and participate in education and employment. So, yeah, as I said, all the psychosocial stuff, they are trying to remove that sort, or at least reduce that sort of thing, de-emphasize that sort of thing, etc. Quality. The extent to which supports meet or exceed a person's needs and expectations. I'm curious that they didn't actually reference international standards of quality here. I'm curious that they did not reference that. I don't know. I guess we'll see. Anyway, reasonable and necessary. The test for determining whether a support should be funded by the NDIS in a participant's plan. What is this test? Seriously, I want to know what this test is. I want to see this test. I want to understand what the logic is behind what they consider reasonable and necessary. Why they cut things from people's plans that, previously was considered necessary, and that all of the medical professionals and all of the letters, like every single piece of documentation says it's necessary, but it gets cut because somebody decides it wasn't reasonable or wasn't necessary. I want to know what that test is. I want that to be transparent. If it is out there, like if it is actually publicly accessible, I've never found it. So if anybody happens to have a copy of that test, or know what that test is, or so on and so forth, please send it to me. I would very much like to know. Also, I would like to know if it has changed over the last few years. Because it should have changed over the last few years. The question is, how? Anyway. Registered provider, a person or organisation that undergoes a process of registration to deliver supports under the current NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission or future National Disability Supports Commission. Residential aged care. Aged care homes, sometimes known as nursing homes or residential aged care facilities, for older people who can no longer live at home and need ongoing help with everyday tasks or health care. Restricted practices. Practices or interventions that restrict the freedom of movement or rights of a person with disability. I want to talk about this a little bit. I need restricted practices, right? I've already spoken about how I need the door locked so that I can't go in and out of the house when I'm in an episode. My care workers are not allowed to lock the door because that counts as restricted practices. In order for them to be authorized to do restricted practices, I need a behavioralist to write a report and a set of recommendations on what they are and aren't allowed to do. The same applies for things like manhandling and things like that. It has taken me almost 2 years, and I don't actually have that paperwork yet. I will actually have that paperwork soon. I probably won't have it by Christmas. It'll probably be in January that I will actually have it, hopefully. But, yeah, it's like, it's taken 2 years to get restricted practices. And to a certain extent, that's good, right? Because you don't want people applying restrictive practices like restraints or locking people indoors or locking people in a car or anything like that. You don't want people applying restrictive practices when they haven't been authorized to do so. The problem is it's taken 2 years to get that authorization. And that shouldn't be how long it takes to get that authorization. So, yeah. Risk proportionate regulation. Ooh, is that a comment? Oh, no, that's just a whole lot of people who are watching. Hi! Anyway, excited for a comment there for a second. Anyway, risk proportionate regulation. A risk-based approach allows a regulator to properly assess the risks of non-compliance and respond in a proportionate way to the harm being managed. I've only heard horror stories about this. I've never heard positive stories. To be fair, positive stories just won't make as big of a circulation as the negative stories do. So that's kind of a thing. Yeah. I want to comment more on this one, but I don't have sufficient statistics to want to actually engage. Like, most of the time when I've talked and I've said, yeah, I've got these horror stories, I've got a point of reference for how common that actually is from some other form of statistics. I don't have that reference point for this. So, yeah. I've only heard horror stories. Horror stories do exist. I'm just not sure whether that's the norm or not. Anyway, safeguards. actions designed to protect the rights of people to be safe from the risk of harm, abuse, and neglect, while maximizing the choice and control they have over their lives. Look, it's a great aim, but I think I've covered enough points at various different stages as to why that hasn't been successful. One of the reasons that hasn't been successful that I haven't really spoken about is the National Commission onto Abuse, Negligence, and of people with disability, like the Royal Commission into that. There was a really big stir about the budget because when that report got finalised, nothing's been done about it. Nothing. There was no budget set aside to actually implement any changes that were recommended. There has been no conversation about actually implementing but pretty much any of those changes. And I can understand that maybe the Labour government was deliberately waiting for this report to come out as well, so that they had both sets of reports, and then they were going to start trying to allocate things. But it was a big deal in the May budget release that they had allocated nothing. Financially speaking, and organisationally, administratively, they had organised nothing so that when the report came in, any action could be taken. Which means that there are people who have reported their abuse, been promised that action will be taken, and action still has not been taken, and abuses are still mounting. So, yeah. Great words, but currently, government action on this part has been to actively not follow through with this. So, And then there's just all the other arguments I have about, maximizing the choice and control they have. We need to be at the center. We need to actually have a voice or some amount of real control over the money, and the decision making, and, our experiences should actually be genuinely taken into account. And it should be in our voice, not theirs. That is actually one of the big problems I have with NDIS is, hey, here is this application form. Here is this tiny little box to explain to us everything that we have asked for. But you can't say it in your own words. You've got to say it how we want you to say it, and we will understand it how we will understand it, and we just won't give you room to actually present what you have to say, realistically speaking. It's hard to have any sort of voice when they get to dictate the framework in and how you get to speak. So, yeah. Anyway, safety typically means being free from injury or danger. It does not matter if the injury or danger is intentional, on purpose, or unintentional, by accident. Shared supports refers to shared living supports. The term is agnostic to the setting in which the supports are delivered. Supports can be shared across a household living together under one roof, but they can also be shared amongst a resident group that have their own apartments in a single development or separate but co-located homes embedded within the community. There's a lot of ways that this can manifest, and that just covers it. One example is, I've visited, a friend of mine lives in one of these apartment complexes, where about 2 or 3 floors of the apartment complex is purely for NDIS participants, but all the rest of the floors are regular people who live there and own the apartments. And those apartment floors are run by a single agency that owns and runs those apartments, and all the people in those apartments share the same care workers, and there may be only 3 or 4 care workers for the entire complex at a time. Not 3 or 4 care workers full stop, but there might only be 3 or 4 active care workers at a time, at any given hour of the day or night. And obviously, that may vary depending on the apartment complex or whatever. So you can see how there can be issues with that sort of arrangement, especially depending on what your needs are. For example, I can't live in an apartment complex, but you can't lock those doors. like, it's illegal to have internal door locks on apartments because it, bunch of reasons, not least of which including fire hazard, the fire risk. And I'm like, no, I can't live in an apartment complex. But I especially cannot live in a situation where I am paying for care worker support from the apartment complex, but those care workers cannot service any of my needs, which means I'd be doubling up on my care worker payments. I'd be paying for a service I can't use for the privilege of living in that apartment complex, and then I'd actually have to split that budget with my actual budget for the care workers I actually do need. So there are some issues here, especially if you need more tailored care. Yeah. And we've already talked about how the Royal Commission actually recommended against a lot of those sorts of living arrangements. Anyway, Social Security. Social Security refers to a system of social welfare benefits, payments, or services available to people on the basis of particular socio-economic needs. Specialist disability accommodation. Housing with specialized design features available to participants with extreme functional impairment and/or with very high support needs. SDA funding can be included in a participant's plan and is paid directly to SDA providers to cover building and maintenance costs. Specialist school transport. Disability-related transport supports provided by state and territory governments to students to safely transport students with disability to and from school. Substitute decision-making. Processes and arrangement that involve someone making decisions on another person's behalf. Can include appointment of guardians, administrators, and financial managers. I've already mentioned, like, issues with custodianship arrangements and, potential issues with nominees, and that I have limits on my familiarity with them, because while I'm aware of some of the serious issues that can and do exist, I am actually more familiar with American statistics and the American system in that regard than I am with the Australian system, and my own relationship with that system, while it does exist, is abnormal compared to the normal experience. And it's abnormal enough that I'm removed enough from the normal experience that I don't feel comfortable in commenting on what the normal experience might be, let alone what it is. And all of that kind of comes under that. Sometimes that sort of thing is necessary. It can be very important, but it can also be prone for abuse, and a lot of checks and balances need to exist that I don't know if they exist or not, at least not appropriately. Substitution effects. In the context of the NDIS, this refers to the replacement of particular government-funded disability services, supports, or assistive technologies outside the NDIS with broadly equivalent NDIS-funded disability services, supports, or assistive technologies. Supported decision-making. Processes and arrangements that involve supporting individuals to make decisions about their lives rather than making decisions for them. Supported independent living. A type of living support for participants with a higher level of support need, that is, those who require 8 or more hours of active support and/or supervision per day to complete daily activities, as well as some level of support for the remaining hours of the day, i.e. 24/7 support. Generally, only participants over the age of 18 are eligible for supported independent living, and support is shared, although not always. Supports. Within the disability community and the NDIS, it means an activity or service that the NDIS provides funding for. Sustainability of the NDIS. Where the NDIS provides supports that are reasonable and necessary, demonstrably net beneficial, and cost-effective. Remember those priorities. Governance arrangements provide clear accountabilities for managing life cycle costs. No, they absolutely don't. And financial risks. Scheme expenditure is predictable and provides benefits to participants, carers, and the broader community. Again, it is not actually predictable, as I already covered with the whole, hey look, you can blow your budget within 3 months and it gets renewed, and 3 months later it gets renewed, and 3 months later that happens. You can't call that predictable, unless you're predicting a blowout. Anyway, provides benefits to participants, carers, and the broader community, ensuring that Australians remain willing to contribute to it in an enduring manner. Okay, here's the thing. So, I get that this is a bit of it's an almost utilitarian angle. It's, hey, we want to make sure that it's the minimum cost, that it's the most efficient costs, and so on and so forth. It's all about the costs, and ensuring that Australians will remain willing to contribute in an enduring manner. Except, that doesn't really matter. Again, some information I got from someone directly in the know, partly because there are a bunch of politicians who have their children on NDIS. To a certain extent, it doesn't matter what the Australian population wants. They're benefiting from this system. They're not going to get rid of it. And a lot of changes that they're going to make, that it's going to be what preserves benefit for themselves. Now, you can attribute that to greed. Absolutely, you can attribute that to greed and selfishness. But you can also simply attribute that to a fundamental misunderstanding of the disabled experience. First off, they're carers, not disabled. Second of all, a lot of people in government, this is unquestionable, and several of them have outright said it, a lot of them follow the charity model of disability. So, oh, look how good we are for giving. It's all about the giver. It's all about the cost on the giver. It's not actually on what the disabled person receives. And it's the difference between, do I give this person money, or do I give this person food that I have decided what food I will give them? That control element is there, but it's also, rewarding the self, and the pains of the giver is often more important. The disabled person should be grateful for whatever they receive. Those sorts of mentalities are all part and parcel in different degrees, but they're all part of the charity model. And so many people in government have that mentality, and they think it's a good thing. They genuinely think that it is a good thing because they believe in charity, they believe in philanthropy, they believe in the responsibility for people who have the means to give. But the power resides with them, and they get to make decisions on who they think is worthy and what they think is worthy. And if they haven't done sufficient investigation to even know, like, hey, what are people in wheelchairs, if you've got a bench that is too high, they can't access what is on the bench. If there are cupboards and shelves that are too high, they can't access what is on the bench. If doors open outwards or even inwards, but if they open in such a way that the disabled person cannot physically open the door because the wheelchair, the space for the wheelchair is not sufficient, all of these things are things that people who don't have lived experience simply may not think about. And this is I've actually said this many times in the past to other disabled people, and I know it's changed some people's perspective. A lot of the time people talk about disabled people and allies often being considered non-disabled people. And I often correct people as politely as I can, and not in a, hey, I'm going to correct you, just like, hey, maybe consider it this way sort of way, is no, disabled people are allies to other disabled people, because our disabilities are often so different that we also do not have comprehensive understanding of what disability is like for other people. Which is a big part of why I kept asking for, hey, can I get other people's experiences? Can I learn about other people's disabilities and how that interacts with the NDIS or doesn't interact with the NDIS, and so on and so forth? Because I want to have that better base of understanding where the issues are for different people with different disabilities in ways that I would not have conceived of. And that is a big part of accessibility programs, of just figuring out, hey, how can we deal with this? And some people's needs, some disabled needs, are directly opposed to other disabled needs. I have this in my own households. My family have got their own medical needs, which I'm not going to talk about in detail right now, but there are fundamental clashes between the fundamental needs of other members of my household and me. And that causes problems. It causes conflicts. It causes physical pain and injury to my family members, which is terrible. But we find that sort of thing all across the disabled community. What one disabled person needs can actually be a direct conflict with what another disabled person needs. And that can be a very big problem in, say, event organizing. So these things do happen all over the place, but bringing it back to this message of ensuring that Australians remain willing, it doesn't matter if the Australians remain willing or not, because it comes from the NDIS funds come from the Medicare levy. People are going to pay the Medicare levy, and the government officials who actually get to make these decisions already have an incentive to maintain the current situation as it is. So it's really, really hard. Even if Australians were unwilling to contribute, it's still really, really hard to create change. And when you have a royal commission come out and say change needs to happen, the government can and does, and literally right now is ignoring it. So, or has been ignoring it as far as we can tell. So, yeah, I'm not, like, none of this is wrong, but you can see where if you put this up as a priority, and if this becomes the focus, if you start treating NDIS like a business, this becomes the benchmark for the whole of NDIS. And a lot of people on the NDIS, and people who worked for the NDIS and have since left the NDIS, a lot of them have said that this has been the basis, this has been the benchmark, this has been what so many people have experienced, especially when, oh look, something was cut because somebody decided it wasn't reasonable and necessary. Yeah, no, they're just trying to cut costs and things like that. That is the accusation that is often leveled, and it's a very, very believable accusation, especially when it comes from people who actually are inside the NDIS. So, yeah. Anyway, continuing forwards, we're almost done. Look how close to the bottom we are. Targeted foundational supports. Early intervention and low-intensity care supports that are primarily for specific groups of people with disability outside the NDIS who are in most need of additional support. Some NDIS participants may prefer targeted foundational supports from supports available as part of their individualized budget. This includes things like home and community care supports, such as shopping and property maintenance, for people with chronic health-related conditions and other disability, aids and equipment, early supports for children with developmental concerns, and psychosocial support services. I'm not going to comment much on that. I've commented enough on tangential stuff to that, but it sounds good. It sounds really good, but is that really being achieved? And sometimes, I'm going to be very clear, sometimes this is absolutely being achieved. That this sort of thing is some people's direct positive experience with the NDIS. And for those people, yes, NDIS does work for some people. But for others, not so much. Taxi subsidy scheme. I've already talked about this one. Financial assistance provided by state and territory governments to people with disability that subsidize their taxi. Sneezing. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. For anybody who didn't tune in for the start of these streams, I am actually kind of unwell at the moment. So I'm doing this stream while a bit unwell. So I offer a little bit of an apology for that sneeze. And or if my voice is nasally, or any times that my brain is just like, oh, I'm just skipping a few words by accident or something. Hopefully I'm not doing that very much. I don't think I am, but it could be happening. Anyway, National Disability Supports, Quality and Safeguards Commission. The new National Disability Supports, Quality and Safeguards Commission reflects the review's recommendation to expand the coverage of the current NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission to regulate all Australian government-funded disability supports. Thin markets. A market where the supply or availability of supports is too low, or the demand for supports is too low or spread out for competition between multiple providers to occur. Oh, that's important. In the NDIS, thin markets most commonly occur in rural and remote areas, but can also occur in metropolitan areas where there is a specific support need, such as for a specialist or culturally informed services. It's also... somebody please correct me on this. Everything in my brain is telling me it's New South Wales, but some places, the coverage is basically one provider across the board. And if I recall correctly, almost all participants, like the majority of participants in New South Wales, receive the same providers. Like it's the same overarching company that owns smaller companies, and yeah. I'm not 100% on that one. I've only received that information anecdotally from somebody who was in a position to know, but I have only received it anecdotally. I've never seen a formalized report on that sort of a breakdown, but I have seen reports on the impact on rural markets and on any area where there is a monopoly or simply where there is a limited supply. This is very true for OTs. The entire OT market across the country is a thin market, and OTs are basically the cornerstone, or have been the cornerstone of so much of the NDIS has a huge carry-on effect. But when we're talking thin markets, that comes across the board. I've already spoken about how there is one specialist in the country for my condition. One. That's it. And I can't see them because they're only allowed to work in certain suburbs. And I do not live in those suburbs. And because of that, I cannot see the specialist in my condition. So, yeah, that is, you want to talk about thin market, that's a pretty thin one. And I would not be at all surprised, it's that, there will be some conditions out there where the only specialists are international. And they also may not be accessible. NDIS doesn't really have the ability to deal with that. So, especially when it requires those medical reports just to get on NDIS. So, yeah. There are some issues. Like, thin markets are a fundamental problem. And it's not just an economics problem. It is also a logistics problem. It's a supply problem in terms of just staff and professionals. And sometimes it's a problem in terms of knowledge. Like a field can be it's simply understudied. It just has not been studied sufficiently. So the thin market is actually in our medical knowledge. So that is a huge problem. And it's something that NDIS should be designed to compensate for, but it's not. NDIS relies on thin markets not being thin. And that is a problem. And that is one of the issues with the economic model of NDIS. And it's a fundamental problem that comes from relying on privatized systems instead of a public system. Now, that's not to say that a public system is the be-all and end-all, that being a public system would solve all problems, but you have different problems under a public model than you do a private model, and some of the problems you get from a private model are very bad. Very, very bad. And a lack of accountability is absolutely one of those problems. Alright, moving on. Tier 2. The term Tier 2 originated from the 2011 Productivity Commission report into disability care and support, which set out the design of the NDIS. Tier 2 referred to the types of supports people with or affected by disability may need to access. This included things like information, linkages, and referrals. In 2015, all governments agreed to rename Tier 2 as Information Linkages and Capacity Buildings ILC. I'm going to have to double check. I think I have some of the original paperwork. Like, some of the original paperwork, some of the original files written by people who helped develop this. I got an email from a friend of mine who they had a lot of those records, and so they sent me a lot of those records. I haven't finished going through them. I have been, but it's been very slow because I didn't want to deal with reading through all of that while also dealing with all of my own NDIS crisis problems. So a lot of them have just been sitting there, but a lot of the stuff, like correspondence to Julia Gillard, and a few other things like that, I've got copies of those sorts of things. So some of this, I think I actually have some of the original drafts for, which someday I will read through all of it, and I will love every moment of it. And the person who sent me all of those files, and for the record, they were absolutely authorized to send me all of those files, they were their files, the person who sent me all of those files, thank you very much. I know I've thanked you before, but thank you very much. I wish I'd been through it all by now. I know you know that why I haven't, but I still really want to thank you just in principle. It is good to have those things that I know that I will be able to reference in future. Citations! Yay! We love them. Transitioned participants. Participants who were accessing defined Australian government, state or territory specialist disability support programs in operation prior to the NDIS and entered the scheme through bilateral agreements between the Australian government and individual states and territories. I see the bottom. We're finally at the bottom. Hooray, we made it. Thank you, people who stuck with me for whatever reason you stuck with me. Anyway, unauthorized restricted practice. So yeah, this is what I was talking before when we were talking about restricted practices. In the NDIS, this is where a restricted practice is used by a provider or worker without receiving authorization from the relevant state or territorial authority, or not used in accordance with a behavior support plan. So yeah, this is what I was talking about. This is a problem. This is a major abuse problem that has been very well recorded, very well documented. We know it has been, ever since NDIS was implemented, all of the statistics for this problem increased. And that's just the ones we know about, but they increased across the board. So it's a huge, huge issue. But the flip side is that as important, it is so important for, authorization to be a thing, but, as I've already said, in my case, it has taken 2 years to get the authorization for my care workers, and they don't have that authorization yet. Hopefully they will have that authorization in January. But even once they've got it, technically, I still need to submit that authorization to the NDIS, and they will take however many weeks it takes to process that information. It's insane how long it is taking to get authorization for a necessary support. And most of my necessary supports, this is the one that's happened the fastest. Anyway, unregistered provider. Under current arrangements, a provider that supports an NDIS participant but is not registered as an NDIS provider. Again, I've already spoken about that. Why it's a problem, but also why it's kind of necessary or desirable. It's a problem, but it has reasons. Utilization rate refers to the amount that a participant spends on their allocated NDIS plan budget, usually expressed as a percentage. I couldn't remember this term. I'm glad that I read through this. I couldn't remember this term the other day when I was looking for those statistics. There are huge problems with the utilization rates, especially in rural areas. I think it was something in the last report. 80% of rural budgets were not utilized. 80%. Now, I don't want to speak too strongly on that, because I want to double check those figures, which is why I was trying to remember what that terminology was. So I am going to go away and double check those figures. But if I am correct that the number was 80%, or it was around 80%, even if it wasn't 80%, it was shockingly high. And that was just, hey, these people have been authorized to spend the money, but either it was allocated into the budget was allocated in a way that they couldn't spend it because they couldn't access the supports that they had been authorized to spend it on, or providers just refused to actually provide those supports even though it was agreed that they would provide them for whatever reason. And these are all issues that often come out because it's a privatized industry. It's not profitable to service specialized services to rural areas, so rural areas will get general services at best. And that's it. And that's even if they get anything sometimes. So, yeah. And finally, Western concept. Consistent with the social model of disability, the recognition of disability as a Western concept acknowledges that disability, as it has been traditionally understood and represented in Australian policy and systems, is based on Western cultural ideas and values. So this is important because we have the local Indigenous population. Obviously, we're also a multicultural society, so it is also important because of that. But it is very important that we acknowledge the Western concept because it can be in direct contrast to our Indigenous population, and we can have clashes there. So, hooray! We got through the glossary. We finally got through the glossary. That only took, I don't even know how many videos, one episode of me passing out for multiple hours, and several breaks and multiple cups of tea. Thank you for those of you who joined me. I know that some of you came and went. I think the people who even at the start of this stream are a different group to the people I have right now, or at least some of you are. But thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. What time is it? It's 10:36. Okay, I actually really want to continue. I really want to actually move on to reading through the recommendations and actions, but that I will do on Sunday. That will be the Sunday plan. Tomorrow I'm going to just take a break. We are not going to touch this at all on Saturday, but Sunday, basically as soon as I wake up, I'm going to start. So this will hopefully be like an all-day Sunday thing, assuming I retain consciousness all day Sunday. We'll see. Anyway, once again, thank you for joining me. For everybody who has commented and given me supplemental information while I've been talking, thank you so much. You've made, it was very helpful, and that sort of feedback loop gives me confidence in also what I'm saying. Because a lot of the stuff that I'm saying, I'm like, am I remembering this correctly? Like that 80% figure that I just referenced a moment ago. Are the statistics or the people I have consulted and the groups that I've consulted, how strong are their biases? Have I sufficiently accounted for their biases? Have I sufficiently accounted for my own biases? And so on and so forth. Getting the feedback, whether it's, great or negative, it reinforces my own confidence in what it is that I'm saying. And most importantly, it's not just that it reinforces my confidence. It's like, oh, I was right. It's also, if I'm wrong, I'm confident somebody's going to actually mention that somebody's actually going to call me out on that somebody's actually going to say, actually, my experience was this. And getting that is great. And I actually did get that a little bit between videos. I did have a couple of people message me after they watched the streams, and they were like, hey, I just wanted to talk about this particular point. The feedback loop is, to me, the most important part of any educational or any communication situation. So thank you, everybody who actually participated in giving me some feedback, both in terms of complimenting what I had to say, confirming what I had to say, or at least being willing to contest what I had to say. Even if we ended up, like, in the conversations I had between streams, we ended up agreeing or clarifying certain points, or, you know, oh, they actually realized they misheard something, or I misinterpreted them, whatever. Like, we ended up in this, like, I don't think it's changed anything that I've actually said so far, but it was good to get at least that little bit of pushback so that I could confirm these facts and figures and so on and so forth. So, yeah, thank you very much for listening. I've said that more than enough times now. And on Sunday, we will continue. In the meantime, have a lovely sleep, and I will hopefully do the same thing. Farewell.